Chapter 4 Breach. They were but 2 turns away from their proposed breach point into the ballroom. Meyers plodded along, rifle nonchalantly aimed into the ground. He was leading the pack. There were 18 of them in total. 3 were badly injured, including Morrison, who walked with a heavy limp. No matter how bad the injury, though, staying behind was not an option to any of them. Morrison would have drug himself along with them, had his entire lower torso been removed and his entrails left to hang, so deep was his fear of being left behind. It was a sentiment the men could all agree with. They arrived at the door, and within seconds the computerized chirp of key inputs being pressed echoed down the hall. "Meyers, what the fuck?" screamed the leader of Tango Squad. He rushed forwards, the butt of his rifle colliding with Meyers' head. Meyers staggered a few steps, then collected himself. He inhaled deeply, then sighed. "It's irrelevant." The leader of Golf Squad grabbed Morrison and pulled him to the side. "I'm not asking you to mutiny," he hissed. "But what the fuck is wrong with Meyers?" Morrison looked over his shoulder. Meyers was staring off into space, the complete opposite direction, and yet it felt as if his captain was staring directly into his soul. "We seen some shit, man. That's all. We just seen some fucking shit." "Yeah, we all have. Shit's all sideways." Morrison shook his head. "You have no idea, man. You have no fucking idea." The mechanic was sizing up his group. Almost none of them would survive. He felt it in his gut. It went deeper than feeling. He had seen it. He didn't know where, but he had seen it. He looked at a blonde-haired girl that Golf Squad had taken in. She had a defiant look in her eyes, but he had seen it snuffed and broken. Yet still, he had to try. Perhaps there was some hope left. Perhaps destiny was not a preordained conclusion. But he knew that whatever was beyond the door did not think of time in the same manner they did. They could read it and edit it like a text document on a computer. But there was a sliver of hope that perhaps the mechanic, by his enlightenment, could do the same. The mechanic approached the woman, admiring her beauty, looking her curves up and down. Yes, in that horrible dream, she had been a beam of light. Something pretty amidst the chaos, like a flower in a wildfire. "Hey, I don't think it's a good idea for you to go in there." She looked at him with her chin angled upwards. She would have been looking down on him had she been a foot taller. "My dad was a Marine in the second breach of Britain. All 3 of my brothers were linebackers. I think I can handle myself." "No, you don't understand. You really," he stressed the word, "do not need to go in there." Her lip curled in disgust and she rolled her eyes at him. He grabbed her arm. "Look at all these men. Trained more than you and armored more than you. More armed than you. And they're scared shitless," he hissed. "Hey, Mech, group up with Juliet." The mechanic turned. Golf leader had given the command. He strode up to the line of men, all perched and ready for action. He gave one final look of disapproval to the woman before trying to steal his mind. Golf leader clamped a hand on the mechanic's shoulder. "I can trust you because you're not with them. If Meyers acts up at all, acts weird, looks funny, steps wrong, shoot him in the back of the head, and don't think twice. Go!" He clapped him on the shoulder and shoved him off. Golf leader hadn't needed to tell the mechanic that. The mechanic had already decided he would do this a long time ago. The chime of the keypad rang out and the door slid open. They moved in, formation tight, their flashlights sweeping over the dance hall. There were hundreds of them gathered there, figures robed in crimson. They all snapped around at once, their eyes made of fractals locking onto the incoming hostiles. The guards never even looked at the overbearing Monolith. The pure horror of what they were seeing was too much. The figures in red were not human, but retained just enough of a human appearance to be disorienting. Strange limbs which had never before been seen on Earth, interbred with bits and pieces of humanity. A gaggle of fingers here, a row of teeth there. One would have a leg and another would have an arm. Some were big, some were small. They spoke in an ancient dialect, screaming curses and praising their lord. Though the men breaching had never heard the language spoken, somehow they understood, as if everything being communicated was being said by esoteric symbology written into their DNA. Morrison lasted 10 seconds before dropping to his knees. He looked down the barrel of his rifle and fired, his brains rocketing upward like a geyser. A red tendril lashed out. A man from Golf Squad was suddenly twisted like a dirty rag. The blonde-haired woman had seen her fate. She tried to escape, but it was too late. Something wrapped around her ankle. Its consistency was entirely wrong. She screamed as she was dragged into the throng of elder beings. The skin from her fingertips was torn off in a futile attempt to gain traction on the metallic ground. Gunfire lashed into the things. Limbs, tentacles, claws, and other oddities were sent flying this way and that. The floor was coated in a thick red paste. The mechanic strode forwards and put the gun to the back of Meyers' head. He fired. Meyers turned, his head now deformed from a bullet hole. He was laughing. "It's too late! It's too late! It was already written, you fool!" The mechanic dumped his magazine, leaving the man's head a mess of dented metal and gore. Something evil was crawling out of Meyers, something dark, something perverse. The mechanic knew it was killable. He had seen it somewhere in another universe. His plasma cutter glowed blue, and he slashed open the torso of Meyers. The thing fell out, a fetal god of some long-forgotten pantheon. Its eyes were terrible, its limbs more so. It said something to the mechanic, something hateful which he did not understand. The plasma cutter plunged into the thing's head, if you could call it that, and it shrieked. The smell of sulfur filled the air, coiling up from the yellow smoke pouring out of the demon. 2 more guards were turned into nothing but red slop. One of the civilian tagalongs began to bash his head into the floor in the hopes of ending his life. One of the guards turned, laughing maniacally as he opened fire into his brethren and killed 4. The magazine on his rifle ran dry. He made a run into another of his brethren. A shotgun blast tore his left arm off. The second blast turned his head into a paste. Screams of the decaying intermingled with the sulfuric smell of spent gunpowder. It smelled, looked, and sounded like hell. As the mechanic looked onwards with wide eyes, he came to the firm decision that it was in fact hell. And as he gazed upon the throne, the idea was set in stone within his mind. Blacker than black, it was the total absence of light. Some might call it the demiurge incarnate. A crimson figure sat on the throne, an inhuman or perhaps beyond human figure. It felt no animosity towards them, for such beings had no emotions in the sense humans had them. There were no chemicals holding it together, no cells, not even that which the spirits are comprised of. Rather, it was entirely different. The body was a construct, though, originally birthed by human hands. It was killable. It had to be killable. The black monolith on which it dwelt was static. It didn't need the monolith at all. It didn't need its cocoonish throne. It had simply made it for the pleasure of creation. Such a horrid thing. Such a thing devoid of light. The being, the new god, was the blood of the monolith. The monolith was devout, yet an object, sentient, yet without thought, alive, yet without life. The mechanic fell to his knees.